Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Bible study here at the Monroe Church of Christ. My name is Derek Glover, and I'm the preacher here in Monroe. And if you're joining us from elsewhere around the country or around the world, we welcome you here, and we thank you for being a part of this study that we are taking part in. This is one of two virtual Bible classes that we do, Bible studies. The other is on Wednesday evening at 6:30, where we're studying the book of Romans, written by Paul. And you're welcome to join us for that as well. And this morning, though, we're going to continue our study of Jesus stories in the Gospel of John and looking at the gospel through the lens that John provides in his writing. The story of Jesus, not necessarily in the biographical sketch, but in his greater theme of the deity of Christ, the holiness, the godliness of Jesus Christ, that he was a man, but he was also God. He was God in the flesh. Last week I was on the road, but we were still here virtually, and we were talking about the Samaritan woman at the well and Jesus' encounter with her. And we're going to pick up there. It's in John chapter 4, where we will begin this morning. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or through our website, monroechurchofchrist.org, we encourage you to leave comments and questions, and we will try to answer those as best we can this morning. So let's pick up where we were. Last week we talked about Jesus going to Samaria, to that region of his world where the outcasts lived. They were not a part of the Jewish community. They considered themselves to be a Semitic people because they were of a mixed ethnicity. But the Jewish people did not consider them to be pure, and so they were ostracized. They were not allowed to take part in that community. And they would not have been the kind of people that a Jewish person would have spent time with, much less a teacher or someone of any stature, but Jesus chose to. And in fact, the Samaritan woman, who was not living a righteous life and who had some missteps in her journey, is the first person that Jesus reveals himself to directly. He has spoken in kind of a third person about the Messiah, about the one who's coming. He's hinted at who he is, but now he's beginning his ministry really in earnest, and he reveals to her, the first person that we have recorded that he reveals to, that when he says that it's me, I'm the Messiah, I am the Christ. And so, as he has been speaking to her, and he says in verse 26 of chapter 4, I who speak to you am he. That's talking about the Messiah that she says she knows is coming. I mean, she was a believer, but she didn't quite understand what that meant when the Messiah would come, and he says, that's me. Verse 27, at this point his disciples came, and they were amazed that he had been speaking with a woman. Now that tells you a lot about their culture. They were amazed he was speaking with a woman, because women did not have standing in that society and in that time. They were not spoken to in this way. They did not have the same stature as a man did, just by virtue of their gender. But Jesus did not abide by that, and he spoke to her. So it was not customary what he was doing, speaking to a Samaritan and to a woman. But the disciples were surprised by this. Yet no one said, what do you seek, or why do you speak with her? They weren't going to ask what he was doing. They were going to interrupt. They weren't going to question him. So the woman left her water pot and went into the city and said to the men, come see a man who told me all the things that I've done. This is not the Christ, is it? She's looking for some verification, some validation. She's trying to gather people to come with her to see who this person is. They went out of the city and were coming to him. Meanwhile, the disciples were urging him, saying, Rabbi, eat. But he said to them, I have food to eat that you do not know about. Now, this is what John does, and this is what makes his gospel so different, is that there are these conversations recorded by John, and everything that is recorded by John serves the purpose of telling us not just what Jesus did, but who he is. Remember, John's gospel was written at the end of New Testament writings, that period in the first century when these letters and books were being written. It was one of the final ones to be written. So much had already been told about the life of Christ. So much had already been written even about the early church, about their doctrines, about their teachings. John wanted to do something different. He wanted to return to the stories of Jesus. and point out that, in fact, this was not just some teacher, not just a mere student of the law, not just a mere uh, point in time or person in time that provided a message that resonated with people. He's not some sort of social revolutionary. He is something more than that. Did Jesus change the landscape? Was there a sense of change in the world through his teaching? Certainly. Certainly, he evidenced some very different ideas than what was common, but he was more than that. I think there's a tendency today to try and dumb down, if you will, who Jesus was. Because we do have a large portion of the world that claims Christianity as its faith, as its religion. And there are those who do not claim that. There are those who don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, or that God even exists. And so there's conflict in certain segments of our world, in the religious world, about the idea that Jesus was who he said he was. There's no disputing that Jesus existed. And so that creates a bit of a problem. He can't just be dismissed as, well, he wasn't a real person. He's a historical figure that we have evidence of through other channels, not just through Scripture. And so for those who would reject Christ, the compromise that comes about in academic circles and in certain religious and philosophical circles is that Jesus was a real person, and that he taught things that pushed for social change, that pushed for political change, that revealed some good teachings, good things about how to live, but he wasn't the Son of God. If he wasn't the Son of God, then none of the other stuff matters. And that's the problem with that way of thinking. If you're going to accept Jesus Christ, if that's going to be the way you live, he has to be the Son of God. He has to be who he said he was, or none of his teachings matter. And so John was writing to directly combat that idea. Remember, he's 60 years or more removed from the time of Christ when he writes this. And so enough time has passed that there are fewer and fewer people who actually witnessed Jesus. And he wanted to write something that would stand in eternity amongst believers to confirm as a witness, yes, he was and is the Son of God. So he includes this little conversation here where they're telling him to eat. And Jesus replies, I have food to eat that you do not know about. Now that's confusing to them. We read that and he's hinting at something here. The disciples sometimes, they take things very literally, and they come off a little dense. I don't think we would have responded much differently had we been there. But they look at one another in verse 33 and they say, oh, did any of you bring him anything to eat? Nobody brought him anything to eat, did they? Did someone show up? Did Grubhub stop by and drop off something from Applebee's? We don't know. What's he talking about? The disciples are saying to themselves. And Jesus said to them, my food is to do the will of him who sent me and to accomplish his work. Jesus states very clearly, I have one purpose in my time. It is the thing that sustains me. It is the thing that drives me. And it is to do the will of God, to accomplish the task he has set for me. He's not here to heal people. He's not here just to provide good teaching. He's not here to just make their life better, or to be some revolutionary in bringing Jerusalem to power over Rome. That's not what he's here for. He has one job: to do God's will. I think all of us could do well to make that the driving force in our life. It's hard to do because there's so much in this world that distracts us, and we have to engage this world in certain ways. We have to earn a living. We have to put food on the table. We have to provide shelter for ourselves and our families. We have to have relationships with people and friendship. We have to engage in this world, and sometimes in the mainstream of this world, and that's difficult. It creates a very difficult sort of balance we have to strike. But what is food? Food is the sustaining power of our bodies. It's the thing that gives us energy. It's the thing that keeps everything working. And keeps us alive. And what does Jesus say is his sustaining power? What is it that provides the calories and the energy and the things to make him work physically? His food isn't physical. His needs are not of the physical. Now, did he have to eat? Sure, he had to eat. Yeah, we see him out in the wilderness in other accounts fasting and meeting with Satan. In the other gospel accounts, they record the temptation of Christ. And we don't have that here with John, but he talks about food. So we know that he needed food because we saw him dealing with the effects of fasting for 40 days when he's in the wilderness. We read that elsewhere. But here he's talking about something spiritual. He's not saying he has some ability to not get hungry. He's saying that what matters to him is not that. We seek after things in life, and they're acceptable to seek after. Christians, we are built to be compatible in certain ways with the world. You know, we are under the same kind of restrictions that every other human is. We have to have food, we have to have water, we have to have shelter, we have to have these things. And Jesus did too. But it wasn't what drove him. And sometimes we get very caught up in trying to climb that ladder, trying to advance in life, getting to the next step, getting to the next stage, getting to the next phase. All fine things. It's part of living in this world. But it is tumultuous. It is challenging. It is difficult. It is fraught with pain and sometimes gladness, but a lot of trouble. And Jesus says, but my food, the thing that I'm talking about, the thing that I have to be a part of that you don't quite grasp yet, is that I'm here to do a job. I'm here to do a job, and I'm not here forever. And you and I have to remember that. This world, we're just visiting here. This isn't where we're going to stay. And so what sustains us is something different. It's an eternal vision, looking ahead. So that's what Jesus says he's to do. Verse 35, do you not say there are yet 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look to the fields. They are white for harvest. Already he who reaps is receiving wages and is gathering fruit for life eternal, so that he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. He's speaking in a bit of coded language. Okay, he's speaking in a way that they would understand. And that's important. God doesn't present us with ideas that we are incapable of understanding. He puts them in ways that make sense to us. If God were to somehow connect to our brain and just download all the information about the universe and about the meaning of life and about his nature and the nature of Jesus Christ, it might short circuit us. I don't know that we're capable of understanding some things that are true about God. But as is often the case, whether through the prophets or the law or through Jesus himself and the New Testament writers, God seeks to put these in terms we can understand. That's what Jesus does for his disciples here. He says, you know, you people, you're aware of an agrarian society. That's what you live in. You know what farming is like. Now, a lot of these are fishermen, but they're around farming. Everybody grows something. And you know that you plant, and then a time comes when you have to go harvest. And they hire people to go out and harvest the crop. And so he says, look up. Look at the world around you. Open your eyes. There's a harvest that is waiting. It's ready. And you can go into that field and reap the fruits of the one who sowed. So he's putting into perspective, there's two different people, two different groups working here. Those who have sowed and those who will reap. Jesus is the one who is sowing. Jesus is the one who is planting the seed. And he says, look, it's time to go harvest, and you're going to go harvest on your own. That's going to be your job. I have come to do the job that God has sent me to do, to sow. Your job after I'm gone is to reap, is to harvest, is to bring about the teaching and the understanding and the salvation of all those who hear my name. And he says that those who sow and those who reap will rejoice together. We're working in combination with God on this task. We're working in combination with Jesus on this task. We're partnering here because we are not the ones who will save people. It is not our message that will bring about redemption for the sinner. It's the words of Jesus. It's what he taught, and it's what he will do, that we'll read about later on, in giving his life. And he's kind of cluing them in a little bit that you're going to have a job after I'm gone. I'm here to do something you don't understand. That's the food I'm eating that you don't know about. I've got to do the will of the Father. I've got to do what he has sent me here to do, and you need to be with open eyes aware of the results of the work that I'm doing. It's going to bring about a softening of people, their hearts. It's going to make them receptive, and now you will carry that message, the message of Jesus Christ, to those who are in need. And the two will rejoice together. We will rejoice one day with the Son of God at the harvest that we bring forth. Verse 37, for in this case, the saying is true. One sows and another reaps. I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. Others have labored, and you have entered into their labor. You are joining a tradition that goes back generations of teaching the will of God to those who need to hear it. He is joining them. Remember, there's always this great sort of balancing of the old law and the new law. And if you are watching on Wednesday nights, we're going to talk a lot about that in the book of Romans. And what did Jesus come to do? And what impact did he have on what the Jews understood as their law and their way of life? Well, he didn't come to just wipe it out and start fresh. He came to put himself into the old law. He was always there. There's this little Jesus-sized hole in the old law that they had failed to see, they had forgotten about. And Jesus came to place himself in that gap and make that law work and really fulfill that law and bring about a new time, a new period, a new dispensation in how God's people would interact with him. It wasn't to get rid of something that wasn't working. It was to complete something that wasn't finished. And that's why we live in the Christian age. And we live by the word of Jesus and not by the law of Moses. And yet, there have been those along the way, the prophets of the Old Testament, those who were teachers and leaders of God's people. And he says, you're going to join with them. And even with their contemporaries who had begun to believe, maybe those who were disciples of John and others who see him as the Messiah. So he gives them this little tidbit here. And boy, it's like he's speaking right to us in a lot of ways. It's like he's speaking directly to us. We have a job to do, fellow believers. We have a task in this world, and that is to carry forth a message and to reap a harvest that Jesus has planted. John talks here about the Samaritans and those who begin to believe because of what he said to this woman, and the word begins to spread amongst this community of ostracized people, marginalized people, who are now beginning to accept and believe. And let's read a little bit about that, and then we'll move ahead. From that city, many of the Samaritans believed in him because of the word of the woman who testified. He told me all the things that I've done. So when the Samaritans came to Jesus, remember, they were on their way to go talk to him. When they came to Jesus, they were asking him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days. Many more believed because of his word. So he's doing something. His speaking is as one with authority, and the perception or the perceptiveness that he exercised with the Samaritan woman carried some weight, because that was quite a sign that they witnessed or heard about. And they were saying to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard for ourselves and know that this one is indeed the Savior of the world. So because of what she had said and witnessed, they became curious, and then they heard for themselves. I think that's really, really telling. That's how evangelism works. You know, we're going to testify about Jesus and about his teaching and about his ministry, but we don't want people to just believe because of what we're saying and to accept it and to live on that basis. We want people to hear for themselves Jesus speak and accept him of their own faith and of their own choice. So verse 43, after the 2 days, he went forth from there into Galilee, for Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things that he did in Jerusalem at the feast, for they themselves also went to the feast. So he's going back to where he did the miracle at the wedding, right? The water into wine. And they've heard about that, and they've been talking about that. So when he comes back, they are beginning to believe and accept him as well. Verse 46, he came into Cana of Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And there was a royal official whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to him, was imploring him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Okay, Jesus is in Cana. He performs a miracle, a sign there, somewhat reluctantly, but in doing so, creates quite a stir. It becomes apparent, word begins to spread. This guy took water and it turned into wine. And you would have the testimony of the servants who filled the jugs. You would have the testimony of the head person who tasted the wine, and all those who were present at the party. They would have said, yeah, they would have pieced this together. He did it. We just filled up water in there, and suddenly it became wine. And so he's developing a bit of a reputation. There are people who are starting to understand something about who he is, that there's something different about him. He goes off for a few days into the Samaritan region, and performs in some ways a sign for them by talking about this woman's history that he would have otherwise known nothing about. When he comes back to Cana, he's a bit of a celebrity now. And for nothing more than what he did at that wedding, he did something miraculous. And so the line begins to form for people wanting him to do a miracle for them. Now listen to what Jesus says in verse 48. He says, unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe. Now, there's a hint of frustration in that. It sounds like he's frustrated. Oh, my goodness, you people, you just won't believe unless I show you something, unless I perform for you. I don't know if that was the case. It's hard to know the tone for a lot of reasons. But he's stating a fact. And John puts this in here to point something out. Jesus wasn't just a miracle worker. He wasn't just there to do things and heal people. He wasn't just a great healer, in other words. He was something more. He wasn't doing this because that in and of itself made any difference in what he was sent there to do. He's making the point. Jesus stated himself, this is really not the goal of why I'm here. The healing and the miracles is really not the goal of why Jesus is here. He says in this one sentence, he states the purpose for the signs and the wonders he will perform. It is to demonstrate his power, his godlikeness, his deity, and to demonstrate his authority, and to bring about belief in people. They had to see something in order to believe. That's a frustrating fact of humanity. Okay, we do have to see things before we believe them. But he understands that if he's going to be listened to, they're going to have to see that. It's going to be what gathers crowds. It's going to be what changes hearts and minds. And so the miracles will take place. So the royal official said to him, verse 49, sir, come down before my child dies. Come with me. Come see my child. You can heal him. And this is how Jesus works, and it's so amazing. Even when we accept that he can do things, we want it done on our terms. I think this is true even now when we petition God for his power and his intervention in moments where we need help. Even though we believe that he can do something, we sometimes ask for it in a way that demonstrates a bias toward this world. Think about this. When people are sick, we often hear folks pray for the doctors and nurses that are taking care of them. Nothing wrong with praying for doctors and nurses. My dad was in the hospital combined for about 10 days over the course of December. Got very seriously ill, and we did a lot of praying, and a lot of people did a lot of praying. And there were times when we prayed for the medical staff. And I have trouble with that sometimes because I'm trying to train myself to think more this way about God and about how his power works. It's good to pray for the people that are tending to those we care for. They need wisdom. They need knowledge and understanding. We want them to be able to do what they do in the best way possible. But they don't have the final say. According to my faith, they don't have the final say in what will happen. Only God has the final say. And so here's this guy. He believes Jesus can heal, But he believes Jesus needs to come to where the boy is to heal him. And he says, come with me before my son dies. If you don't get there in time, we're going to be out of time. And Jesus replies, go. Your son lives. He doesn't have to be there. He just has to speak. He doesn't have to do things according to our convention and our way of thinking. He simply speaks. The Spirit moves, and the boy is healed. The man believed. That's the key part. The man believed. He believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started off. As he was now going down, his slaves met him, saying that his son was living. So he inquired of them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him. So the father knew that it was at the hour in which Jesus said to him, your son lives, and he himself believed, and his whole household. This is again a second sign that Jesus performed when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. So you had the water to wine, and you had the healing of the official's son. 2 signs, 2 miracles, now confirming his authority, now generating a lot of talk about his power, and John recording it so that we can understand his deity and his strength and his identity as the Son of God. Jesus didn't even have to move from where he was to heal this man's son, and did so immediately so that it could be confirmed that there was no other explanation for why this boy recovered in the way he did, other than it was when Jesus spoke. We have to leave room in our life for Jesus to speak. We have to leave room in our world for Jesus to speak. We are to be reflections. We are to be messengers. We are to try and stay out of the way of the work of the Lord and of the words of our Savior. We need to let Jesus do some talking from time to time. We need to let him be the one who says the words, because when we get out of the way, when we stop becoming the source of the words and we let Jesus begin to speak, and it becomes evident that it's not our words, it's not our teaching, we're just simply reflecting what Jesus has already done and said. When it becomes evident that we're getting out of the way, it leaves no other explanation except the power of Jesus. There was no other explanation for the son's healing because of how Jesus did this. And the man believed, his whole household believed. This whole region is beginning to believe. And Jesus is going to perform many other miracles, and we're going to see John leans heavily on the miracles and the signs, and there's several of them coming up in these next this next chapter or two that we're going to study in the coming weeks. And they all serve the purpose of showing us who Jesus is and what he is here to do. And that is to change this world, not necessarily even in a physical way or a tangible way, but to change the world in a spiritual way. And we have to have open eyes that can see it in that light. We're going to stop there this week. We don't go too long because we have people in town here that may be watching and need to get ready and get here to the building to have our worship service. But we invite you to join us wherever you're watching from for our worship service. If you're here in Monroe, we start around 11 o'clock. And if you're not, you can tune in right where you are right now at that time, and we will have a live stream of our worship service. Don't forget about Wednesday night, 6:30, also right here, wherever you're watching from. We're going to be discussing the book of Romans. And I encourage you to check out all the things that we have on our website at monroechurchofchrist.org. And we look forward to seeing you for worship here shortly.